It's very unique for someone's job to be their hobby as well. Mr. David Cesan of Hampden doesn't leave his job at the office. Mr. Cesan is a welder and spends his free time restoring old stoves and fixing all kinds of things for all kinds of people.
I've lived in Hampden now for 22 years, since just before the flood, the 55 flood.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, I kind of like it here. I went to Minnechaug, years ago, and I like the area. And, I've been working for the Ironworkers Union for the last 10 years. For the most part, Springfield Steel Erectors has been my main employer. And a good part of my day's occupation is involved with welding. And since I feel myself a fairly experienced welder, why it's just kind of natural that I've, come into it as a hobby as well. And I've got 2 welding machines. I've got a little 220 amp, what they call a buzz box that runs off of electricity. Then I have a portable welder out there. It's a large Hobart on a trailer. I do quite a bit of welding for people as they come along, if a lawnmower needs repairing or a hatchway or really just about anything. The only thing that I'm not equipped to weld would be aluminum or pot metal, white metal, but any cast iron or steel, mild or high tensile strength, I can generally repair pretty well.
So you have to know about the metals you're working with in order to work with them?
Pretty much, yeah. A lot of them are easily identifiable. You can do that on a grinding wheel by depending on how the sparks are given off. But some of them, if they're an alloy of some type, it's pretty difficult to distinguish exactly what it's made of.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to use different techniques to work with the metals if they're different?
Oh, there are quite a few different techniques, yes, and a lot of different types of welding rods that you use. You use sometimes what they call an AC rod or a DC rod or a DC reverse, depending on the application,
Mm-hmm. Did it take you a long time to learn this trade? You said it is involved in your job. Was it,
Well, part of my apprenticeship, the ironworkers have a 3-year apprenticeship. And for 3 years, I went to welding school at trade school in Springfield. Mm-hmm. And that was 2 nights a week. Mm-hmm. So you come out of that knowing a little bit about, what you have to do.
You talked about the tanks, and I see the tanks here.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain a little bit about them to us?
Sure. The large green tank is the oxygen tank.
Mm-hmm.
And the short, dark-colored tank is the acetylene tank. And here is this is what they call the torch, and this tip that's on here is used for cutting metal. This particular tip will cut steel up to probably 3/4 of an inch thick. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, in the cutting process, you preheat the metal with the acetylene, and that gets the metal quite hot. Mm-hmm. And then through this trigger here, when you depress the trigger, that gives a cold blast of oxygen. And that causes the reaction where you're able to trim through the metal. Mm-hmm. I have another tip here. This is the welding or brazing tip. This particular one is a number 3, and you simply take off your cutting tip, put on your welding tip, and you have to turn down your acetylene and turn down your oxygen because it doesn't require quite as much as the cutting process does. And you're able to braze sheet metal or mild steel, quite thin sheet steel that if you were arc welding, well, you'd burn right through,
So you have to use different tips depending on what you're welding.
There again, yes, as I mentioned, this is a number 3. If you used a number 7, that would be quite a large tip for greater penetration.
A lot of people know you're here to do their welding if they need it done?
Quite a few people in town know that I'm here, yeah. I don't really do it as a business, more as a favor, to people, because I don't charge that much, $1 here, $1 there, puts a little milk and bread on the table.
Yeah. Welding a very unique hobby, or do you think a lot of people do this hobby?
I think there's probably quite a few backyard welders, people who have hobbies and interests similar to mine.
Is there much competition in welding as a profession?
I would say yes. If you have a shop you know, you kind of have to compete with other shop owners and keep your prices proper and do a real Class A job, or you just won't get the business from the same construction firm again. I don't know that many daring people that have gone off on their own. I do know one or two, and they have been very successful.
Would you ever consider doing it just for a full-time job? Do you think you could make enough money if you advertised it?
Not here, and I don't think I could run a business out of my home. And you'd have to build up quite a clientele, say if I had a spot in Springfield, you know, in order to really make a go of it.
So you'd rather just keep it as a hobby?
I would, yeah. You know, mostly for myself and for people, you know, in the area if something breaks or whatever.
Can you create things through welding?
Oh, yes. That's coming to be quite a thing today, welding sculptors, you know. I've been to a couple of displays at Springfield College. A friend of mine, Lionel Jardine, has done some very nice welded sculpts. I've done a few things back in welding class. When I got bored, you know, doing other things, I put little pieces together and made little figures and so forth. It's kind of fun.
We asked Mr. Cesan what besides welding he did as a hobby.
Well, I guess probably the restoration of old cast iron stoves is probably my main hobby. I like to take them when they're broken or cracked or pieces missing and try and bring them back to life, you know, make them usable for people. A lot of times these old stoves are out in a dump or on a deserted road somewheres. And
people throw them away?
Well, they have for the last probably 30 or 40 years since, you know, gas and electricity came in. And it's kind of interesting to try and bring back to life what is, as it sits, not usable, you know, to anyone. This stove came from Wilbraham. It's a nice old-fashioned parlor heater. It's pretty well ornamented. You might notice, I guess you can't probably get it with a camera, but the top lid here has a little acorn on it. And the name of the stove is a splendid oak. You know, so it kind of ties in. I found the lid in a different location. It didn't come with the stove, but it's kind of nice. When I picked this stove up, it belonged to a friend of mine who had it in the cellar of his home. And when he moved into that house on Main Street, he started a fire in the stove. And what happened was that the whole basement and house filled with smoke because the tin portion of the stove here was all rotted away from too many hot fires. And what I did, I took a 35-gallon drum, a regular steel barrel, and I welded little tabs on the end here, and I cut it and welded it to fit the stove, and it's been, well, like that for, I guess, 5 years now. You know, we've gotten some real nice use out of it. Over in Indian Orchard, I had the little nickel parts nickel-plated. You might notice that the little isinglass windows in the door here, you can watch the fire, you know, from the outside as it goes. I repaired this stove about, I guess 2 years ago. I used to use this in the fireplace, but it wasn't as efficient because a good portion of the heat went right up the chimney. And this wall had burlap wallpaper on it, which had started to come down at the top. I took down the burlap wallpaper, and there was an old flue located in the wall, which I was very happy to find. And I brought the little stove out from the fireplace and hooked it up here over the nice slate of marble. As far as the repair of this stove, there was no draft control with it. I had to make up this tin piece here. I made this out of sheet metal, and that's how you control your draft at the bottom of the stove. Also, there were several cracks in the bottom, and I had to weld those cracks. This stove, I would say, probably dates around 1880, 1885. It's a Revere Airtight, and it's made by the Low and Hicks Foundry of Troy, New York. It's a very nice old stove. It's what they call a chunk stove. You just open up your little door on the side here, and you can put in your chunks of wood. It's relatively fancy. You might notice it looks almost like a church. It's quite ornate in the design of it. You have little doors. You have two on this side, one in front, and another door on that side, as well as two lids on the top whereby you could cook on the stove. And it's a nice little heater. In here we have a low ceiling, and this stove heats very well. It's quite comfortable when the children are watching television at night. I have this little stove going, and well, it keeps the old house pretty warm in here.
Good quality comes from dedication and most of all having a true interest in one's work. Like a lot of fine craftspeople in New England, Mr. Cesan has added one extra ingredient to his craft, and that is genuine willingness to help other people.